really amazing to me. I mean, as Gigi said, I was, one of the people who was marching. I was at the very big march in Washington, and we took over the Pentagon and all that in the 60s. So you'd think that I would be used to this, but not at all. I mean, the numbers that we've had so far are that in Washington, D.C., there were 500,000 people. This is based on the Associated Press. And that's 3 times more people than attended the inauguration the day before. In New York City, according to the mayor's office, Bill de Blasio, there were 400,000 people marching. In Los Angeles, 750,000 people took to the streets. Chicago, 250,000. Boston, 175,000. There were people in San Francisco, people in Baltimore. We had about 6,000 people in Santa Barbara. There were people in Denver, in Madison, Wisconsin, and a lot of other cities. But the scope of this is absolutely unprecedented. There has never been anything that has captured people the way this has, and it's because the election went on for so long, and some of the things that many of us read and saw were so shocking to us that over a period of time, people who might have been on a very small boil when the election started, and there were, 17 people who were running for the Republican candidacy, by the time the election occurred, so many of us were shocked and disheartened. And that was the big difference. And this is something happening here. When I was marching against the war in Vietnam, that was something that was happening way, way, way far away, It was, of course, the first time we saw a war on the news. So that was a very big difference. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And we'd never seen that before. There was, there were films of World War II that people would see in movie theaters, but there wasn't any footage coming on television into your home because there weren't TVs during World War II anyway. So this was a whole big, big difference.
Yes, indeed. Now, what is it about Donald Trump that is causing this unprecedented outcry?
It's the lack of empathy and the tone of voice. This show is the Compassionate Connection show. So you know that it's about communication. And of course, what I do, that I teach people how to calm themselves before speaking. And when they communicate, whether it's orally or in writing, they only communicate in a motivated and inspiring way so that their needs and their listeners' needs are met. And I've developed lots and lots of tools to promote that. And so here is someone who not only doesn't do it, but doesn't seem to have any interest in doing it. And so all of this shooting from the hip is what I have seen to be the cause of this outrage, of women rising up and their partners, their husbands, their sons, their brothers, their fathers, rising up and being absolutely unwilling to tolerate and endure what they are so afraid is going to happen in America.
Great information, Susan. Now, I know that Teresa Schuch, a retired attorney in Maui and a fashion designer in New York City, had the idea to create a march. How did they accomplish it?
I think that's as incredible as any part of this whole experience. We've heard for how many decades it takes one person. One person can make the difference. But the truth is, there are very, very, very few scenarios where one person does make a huge difference. And this is that one scenario. So yes, you can talk about the person who invented the artificial heart, or the person who invented whatever it is that really changed people's lives. But this is one woman, Teresa Schuch, who basically decided the night of the election that she couldn't tolerate this and that she wanted to march. She went online to a Facebook group called Pantsuit Nation that I'd never heard of. And she put out this statement on Pantsuit Nation that she wanted a march and inviting people to march. And by the next morning, there were thousands of people who had decided they were going to march with her. And everything grew globally from there. Just amazing. And doesn't it give you hope about what you can accomplish in your lifetime when you look at a situation like this?
Thank you, Teresa. Now, I know, Susan, that you told me that you marched in the 1960s to end the animal testing and to end the war, of course, in Vietnam. What did you actually learn that was successful protesting, as both of these causes had very successful outcomes?
Well, it's really the power of the pocketbook. You know, the thing that was so extraordinary about ending animal testing in so many different cases where, you know, there's very little animal testing now, in cosmetics, for example. Why? Because women flatly refuse to buy L'Oreal products. L'Oreal hung out and hung out and hung on, but for a long, long time they had almost no business because we had been marching and marching and marching for a very long time. And finally, they announced that they were terminating animal testing. And in fact, we knew long ago, we knew in the 60s, that testing on animals was a very inexact way to discover anything. And there are many, many reasons that I don't want to go into, but feel free to email me if you want. And so there's no reason for animal testing. Unfortunately, the FDA still requires animal testing for drugs. And that's why it's so wonderful that so many products are nutraceuticals and they don't need FDA approval. So this is a very complicated story, but the bottom line is the power of the pocketbook. If you don't buy it and your friends don't buy it, and most of the people you know don't buy it, eventually they are going to feel it and they are going to have to react. And the way that they're going to react ultimately is going to be make changes. Now, when it came to the Pentagon, there were lots of reasons to end the war in Vietnam, and they were all financial. We were losing the war. And so ultimately, we were losing the war. We were spending enormous amounts of money to wage the war. The people in the United States of America were sick and tired of the war. Why did that one end? Well, it turns out I had no idea at the time. I only learned this recently. The reason that the Vietnam War was finally ended by President Johnson is because in those days, you could march in front of the White House. I lived a couple of blocks away. I lived on 19th Street when I went to George Washington University, and then I lived on 14th Street when my boyfriend moved there. So I was just blocks from the White House. You could walk in front of it, you could march in front of it, and Johnson told his family and many, many others that the sound of people protesting every single day in front of the White House drove him to distraction and caused him to decide to end the war in Vietnam. How do you like that? So now you guys who are marching in Washington, you're going to have to be a lot louder because you're not allowed to get that close to the White House anymore.
Oh, that's an intriguing story. It can make a difference. Now, what can parents and relatives do to demonstrate to the young ones that social change in America is an opportunity for all Americans?
You have to show them that you are committed to this. I'm not suggesting that you take them on marches because there's inherent danger there. However, they need to watch the films that are appropriate for the age of the child. They need to see what you're doing. If it's you on the phone, as I've been doing everything possible to get to Paul Ryan, and you're doing this and you have children at home, a child can hold on, a child can redial, a child can participate. So it's what you teach your children in every area of life is what they're going to do, right? They're going to see that. My mother was always teaching me about Mahatma Gandhi. and the Dalai Lama, and what extraordinary human beings they were. So it's no coincidence that I would end up like this, right? And what are you teaching your children? You want to teach them compassion for others. You want to teach them self-respect. You want to teach them respect for others. You want to teach them decency and fairness. These are a lot of the different reasons that people marched around the world and that 3 million people marched in the United States.
What a great influence parents do have, and responsibility.
Yes.
Now, how important is it to become part of a group if you really want to make a bigger difference?
As you see with the Pantsuit Nation point, luckily she didn't have to go to 53,000 meetings to accomplish this. So for those of us who don't like going to meetings and don't like groups and all of that, and I say this about myself, and I know the same is true for Gigi, the beauty of being online now, the beauty of Facebook and other social media options is you can make a difference in people's lives, and you don't have to go get dressed and put on a lot of makeup and go drive anywhere. You can stay at home and do this. This is a miracle. You can make such a gigantic impact without leaving your house. So now the question is, it's so much easier. What are you going to do? Because I can tell you, you feel better when you contribute in some way. You feel better when you make a difference. I started a company in the late 80s that was about ending teenage depression. We contributed money that we raised as part of the company to save the children. You feel better. I started doing animal welfare work, when I was a kid in the 70s. So you feel better. That's the reason, the first reason to do this. Not because of others, not because of them, certainly not because of the presidency. Begin by doing it because it makes you feel more hopeful and less hopeless.
That's wonderful. And actually, you get a lot of support when you do have the courage to step up. Now, okay, I'm curious, why do some activists have great success, like Gloria Steinem and Jane Fonda, and others just don't seem to get the results?
Well, again, aside from Teresa Shook, though Teresa Shook is an attorney, so she's a smart woman and obviously very, very committed, being an attorney for many years, and she's a mother and a grandmother. But the reason that those two women were so successful, Gloria Steinem and Jane Fonda have a lot in common, in fact. First of all, they're both very, very smart. Secondly, they both were unbelievably beautiful. It doesn't hurt when you're standing in front of a group of people to be really easy on the eyes. I say this as a heterosexual woman. It's true. I'm not being, politically incorrect saying this as a guy, but it's true. If you're put yourself together in a certain way and you're more attractive, people will find it easier to look at you and watch you and pay attention to you. But the thing that you have to factor in with both Gloria Steinem, who had an exceedingly wealthy boyfriend for a very long time, a very, very powerful guy, and Jane Fonda, who was, of course, a movie star and whose dad had been a major movie star, and she was married first to one of the most prominent French directors, Then she was married to a guy who became a very important member of Congress, Tom Hayden. And so in those years, she had tremendous power, and so did Gloria Steinem. And of course, Jane Fonda was known to everybody because of the workout videos. So these were two incredibly well-known people who were able to use their fame, use their intelligence, use their fortunes, and use their beauty to make the biggest possible difference. And thank God they're still doing it today.
That's wonderful. Yay. Now, why is emotional balance the first essential step for social change?
You can't accomplish much if you're on an emotional roller coaster, or if you go to most of these rallies and scream and yell and throw things and have a tantrum. You know, there are a lot of different demonstrations. And I honestly believe the most extraordinarily powerful demonstrations, whether you're talking about the nonviolent communications of Mahatma Gandhi, or later the nonviolent communication kind of thinking that went into the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's work. And of course, Marshall Rosenberg was part of that. And that's where he saw the nonviolent part of it. Or if you're talking about what happened on the 21st, because here were 3 million people in the United States of America, almost no people were arrested. I think there were 200 people arrested in Washington. And that was really at the very beginning when they, you know, the police were probably advised to do that. And then I'm guessing that it will come out that at some point the police were advised not to do that anymore, because you really didn't hear about arrests around the country. And so I believe that the reason this was so effective and made such a difference in our consciousness is the fact that the people were really advised, stringently advised, to avoid any kind of demonstration that would turn violent. And I have to say that I prefer that for countless reasons.
Absolutely. Now, what about Al Sharpton, one of America's most controversial and also most successful people regarding social change? He is the key person in Black Lives Matter. What is the message that he promotes?
He's an amazing guy. I didn't understand him when he started. I didn't understand the fact that what he was doing was the opposite of what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was doing. You know, what Al Sharpton was doing was very dramatic and in your face. But listen, this is a guy who could put together a march of thousands and thousands of people at the drop of a hat. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about how do you make a difference. Now, my personal preference is nonviolence. But I'm not somebody who was deprived of the vote. I'm not somebody who had a relative lynched. The things that happened to me happened to my family, you know, before they came to the United States. And it was a long time ago. So we have to have compassion for people whose suffering is not only real, because all humans suffer, but recent. And so I really am taking a different look at Al Sharpton, because this is a time where we need to be able to pull thousands and thousands of people together in minutes. We need to be very focused. We need to make sure that the vote is very focused. And again, I just am looking at what he has been able to accomplish in a different way. And I think that that's something that we need to be able to do. Somebody may not have the preferences that we have. They may not have the strategies that we have. Certainly, if you look at what the Dalai Lama advised all of the monks and nuns who were tortured by the Chinese to do in Tibet, it's, you know, the most non-violent, to the degree where some of them put themselves on fire, poured gasoline over themselves and burned themselves. That's the ultimate level of, you know, non-confrontational behavior, but to me it's extremely violent. So you'll find what works best for you, and you do want to keep your eyes open and your ears open and really look at the decisions that other people are making, trying to meet their own needs. That's what true nonviolence is all about.